back before not only commerce and civilization, back before the Christian church had tamed it into all saints and all souls. It was a powerful moment in the pre-Christian community in Europe, which understood that the beginnings of each season and the midpoints were sacred because uncanny forces were present in a more real way. And it turns out that in Western and Northern Europe, before Christianity had its way, the time around the 1st of November was New Year's for those communities. Not New Year's like blow a horn, toot, and go and get drunk. I think they did drink. But it wasn't merry, it was kind of scary because the spirits of the dead were supposed to be coming close to the world at that point. They'd come back out, and if you weren't careful, you might bump into one, and that's never going to work out well for you, I should point out. So the trick was to keep them at bay. You started fires, or you banged on things, or you hung out lanterns, some of them carved from large gourds, for example. You know what I mean? You can see where the stuff comes from. It was called Samhain. And those people, they understood that there was power out there, out beyond their homes, because when the sun went down, there were no traffic lights, no street lights, no sewer systems, no dial-up, no DSL. When the sun went down, it was dark. And there were beasts out there, and they would eat you up. Power. Surrounded by power that you cannot control. That is the experience that gave birth to Halloween, Samhain, the sense of spooks and things that go bump in the night. And I think we've forgotten how real that was for our ancestors. We also forget how real it is for our children. They experience raw power all the time. They are short, we are tall. They are weak, we are strong. We make the rules, they have to follow them. They know what the difference of power really is like. They get through it every day. But we adults, we like to think the world is under our control. We're grown-ups. We can do whatever we like. And I would like us this morning to recover, at least inwardly, a sense of being at the mercy of powers larger than ourselves. Because you see, we forget that. We like to think we go to nature to get that, and in some ways we do. But there's a part of me, and maybe you watched the series on the national parks that Ken Burns did. Beautiful, wasn't it beautiful? Just beautiful. America's best idea, they said. John Muir talking about the inspiring qualities of nature. And we all know about Henry David Thoreau going down the Merrimack and all these naturalists with their ruddy complexions and their stout-hearted selves living in the woods and being pure and things like that. But I think that is part of the commoditizing of nature. We drive up to the edge of the Grand Canyon. You can drive there. Get out of the car, walk over, look out and say, cool. Get back in the car and drive away. When the first Hispanic European settlers, or shall we say explorers, saw the Grand Canyon, they looked out into it and they saw not beauty, but terror. It was so huge, incomprehensibly deep, immeasurably large that they could see it only as evidence of nature's uncontrollable power. It was terrifying. So I want us to get back in touch with that because we've been sanitized. We go to our parks, we get the little maps, we drive around. Oh, there's Old Faithful, and there it does. Just what it says it's going to do, and it's on the clock, see? Nature is under our control. It takes part in that American myth we have of the betterness of being in the country. The country is a better place. Nature is better than the city. It's unspoiled. It's pure. It's Eden-like. And in fact, it was Eden-like for some people. The wilderness was, for many earlier European Americans, a symbol of the primal goodness. That's that whole transcendentalist movement of the 19th century. Of course, they did all their tramping through New England and upstate New York, where there were canals and boats and roads and houses and places you could go at night. So nature was pretty because you didn't have to be there all the time. But we even like it a lot now. Wendell Berry, that great poet out of Kentucky, who writes this beautiful passage, shows us how much we still love nature for its beauty and its consoling powers. He says, "When despair for the world grows in me and I wake in the night at the least sound and fear of what my life and my children's lives may be, I go and lie down where the wood drake rests in beauty on the water and the great heron feeds, and I come into the peace of wild things." The peace of wild things. We like that phrase. Go out into the woods and feel restored. Mary Oliver, the poet laureate of religious liberals coast to coast, says you don't have to be good. You do not have to walk on your knees for 100 miles through the desert repenting. You only have to let the soft animal of your body love what it loves. Tell me about your despair and mine, and I will tell you mine. Meanwhile, the world goes on. The sun and the pebbles and the rain are moving across the landscapes. Meanwhile, the wild geese, high in the clear blue air, are heading home again. These images of nature is consoling, strengthening, spiritualizing our lives. They're very powerful images, but they're not the image of our Halloween ancestors, are they? They had a completely different relationship to nature because they had a completely different relationship to power. Of course, we're coming up on Thanksgiving. Pilgrims, you know. When they got here, they called it what it was: wilderness. A wilderness that you had to build a house to avoid freezing in. They arrived in December, by the way, not in November. It was cold. You ever been to Massachusetts in December? It would make you want to come back to West Michigan. It gets cold. That whole ocean is just there making you miserable. And they barely survived. They all got sick. Most of them died. And then they met the locals, who seemed friendly, but, there was the communication thing. Made it rough. The Pilgrims, the Puritans, the early Europeans who came here realized it was a wilderness, not a park. And in that respect, they're much closer to the biblical images that we use so comfortably now. Moses out there in the wilderness. You can drive there now, too. You can spend the night in a nice air-conditioned place, I'm sure. You can go to Cairo, and you won't have to make bricks. And you can go into the wilderness, and you can fly in and fly out the same day. The reason I bring all this up is because wilderness and nature and Halloween are all symbols of power, the power outside us. But I want you to realize that when we look at the power outside, we're also looking at the power inside. Gretel Ehrlich, a writer in the earlier part of this century, writes, "We use the word wilderness, but perhaps we should say wildness. In wilderness, I seek the wildness in myself. And in so doing, come on the wildness everywhere around me, because after all, being part of nature, I'm cut from the same cloth." I'm trying to bring the wildness back to mind. It's not a garden. It's a desert. It's not a forest. It's a wilderness. To remember that power, that wildness, that untamed, undomesticated, uncivilized, get lost in it, the sun goes down and it's too dark to see wildness, not only of nature, but of your own spirit. All this fall, Matthew and I have been looking to children as spiritual guides, people from whom we adults can learn. And of course, we like to portray children as pure and innocent, kind of like nature. But we also know that there are children like Max who talk back to their mothers and mean it, that they are not always pure and innocent, that they do get into serious mischief.